Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jesse Bramwell, and I've been working these mountains for near 2 decades now. 18 years walking the trails of George Washington National Forest, fixing broken bridges, marking dangerous spots, and keeping folks safe in the backcountry. My daddy did this work before me, and his daddy before him. We know these hills like most people know their own backyard. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not some city kid who jumps at shadows. I grew up hearing all the old stories about things that live in the deep hollers, haints and boogers and such. Never believed a word of it. When you spend your life in the mountains, you learn the difference between wind through trees and something that ain't natural. At least I thought I did. September 1962 started out like any other month. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the morning fog hung thick in the valleys. I was 44 then, getting a little gray at the temples, but still strong enough to haul a 50-pound pack 20 miles without breaking a sweat. Had my truck loaded up with trail markers and ready to head out to Panther Creek Hollow for a 3-day patrol. Panther Creek sits about 25 miles from the nearest town, deep in a narrow valley where the sun barely touches the creek bed even at noon. It used to be a coal mining area back in the 1890s. Whole camp down there once, company houses, store, even a little school, all gone now, swallowed up by rhododendron and mountain laurel. Just some old foundations left in the mine entrance they sealed up after the disaster. That's when 47 men got trapped underground. Cave-in happened so fast nobody could dig them out. Just left them down there in the dark. The company pulled out after that, and the families moved on. Been empty ever since. I was checking my gear one more time when Billy Hutchins pulled up in his Ranger truck. Lee was my partner sometimes. Good man, but new to the mountains. Only been with the service 2 years, came down from Ohio. Still learning the difference between a black bear track and a big dog print. "Morning, Jesse," he called out, climbing down from his cab. "Heard you're heading to Panther Creek. Mind if I tag along? Could use the experience in that terrain." I didn't mind the company. Billy was eager to learn, and an extra pair of eyes never hurt when you're looking for lost hikers. That's what started this whole thing. 2 college kids from Richmond hadn't checked in at the ranger station like they were supposed to. Last anyone heard, they were planning to camp near the old mining site. "Sure thing," I told Billy. "But it's rough country. Creek runs funny down there, and the fog can get thick enough to cut with a knife. Easy to get turned around." We loaded up Billy's truck with extra rope and first aid supplies. Standard missing persons protocol. I'd done dozens of these searches over the years. Usually found folks within a day or two, maybe dehydrated or with a sprained ankle, but nothing serious. No reason to think this would be any different. The drive out to the trailhead took us deep into the forest on old logging roads that barely qualified as roads anymore. Trees closed in on both sides, thick enough to block out most of the sky. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees just from the shade. "Quiet out here," Billy said as we parked at the end of the road. He was right. Even for the mountains, it felt too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just our boots crunching on dead leaves as we shouldered our packs and started down the trail toward the hollow. The path wound down through stands of oak and maple, following an old mining road that was slowly being reclaimed by the forest. After about 2 miles, we could hear Panther Creek running me-where below us, though the thick rhododendron made it hard to see. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. My compass started acting funny, needle swinging back and forth like its paws. Couldn't decide which way was north. I tapped the glass, figured maybe I'd banged it against something. "Temperature's dropping," Billy said, pulling his jacket tighter. I looked up through the trees. Sun was shining bright up on the ridges, but down in the hollow, our breath was starting to fog. Had to be 20 degrees colder than it should have been for a September afternoon. "Creek makes its own weather sometimes," I told him, though I'd never seen it quite like this. "These narrow valleys can be funny." We kept walking, and the cold kept getting worse. Soon we could see our breath with every step. The trail curved around a big boulder, and suddenly we could see the creek itself, dark water running over smooth stones. But something was wrong with it. The water seemed to be flowing uphill in spots, making little ripples that went the wrong direction. I stopped and stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Jesse," Billy's voice sounded strange. "Look at this." He was standing by an old wooden sign, the kind the mining company would have put up 70 years ago. The wood looked new, like it had just been painted. It read, "Panther Creek Mining Company. Safety first." That sign should have rotted away decades ago. But here it was, looking like someone had just hung it yesterday. The sign bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I'd been through this area a dozen times over the years, and I'd never seen anything like it. Old wood doesn't stay preserved like that. Not in these mountains where the humidity and rain rot everything pretty quick. "Maybe someone's been fixing up the historical stuff," Billy said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. I ran my hand over the wood. It felt real enough, but cold as ice, even though the sun was hitting it direct. The paint was so fresh I could smell it. We kept following the creek downstream toward where the old mining's camp used to be. The temperature kept dropping until we could see our breath thick as winter fog. My radio started crackling with static, which wasn't unusual this deep in the mountains, but then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Children's voices, speaking in words I couldn't quite make out. Old-fashioned sounding, like the way my grandmother used to talk. But there weren't supposed to be any kids within 25 miles of this place. "You hear that?" I asked Billy. He was staring down at the creek, not paying attention. "Hear what?" The voices faded back to static. I tried adjusting the frequency, but all I got was dead air. That's when Billy pointed to something that made both of us freeze. There in the mud beside the creek were footprints, small ones like children's bare feet. But they weren't just in the mud, they were pressed into solid rock like the stone had been soft when someone walked across it. "How is that possible?" Billy whispered. I knelt down and touched one of the prints. The rock was cold and hard, been that way for thousands of years probably. But the footprint was there, clear as day, toes and everything. We followed the strange prints along the creek bank. They led us around a bend, and suddenly we could see the remains of the old mining camp. A few stone foundations poking up through the weeds, rusted pieces of metal that might have been machinery once. And right in the center of it all, a big wooden building that definitely hadn't been there before. It looked like a company store, the kind they used to have in mining camps. 2 stories tall with a wide front porch and signs advertising tobacco and dry goods. The paint was fresh, the windows clean, and smoke was coming up from the chimney. "That's not possible," I said out loud. Billy was backing away. "Jesse, we need to get out of here." But before we could move, the front door of the store opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing overalls and a flannel shirt, the kind of clothes workers wore in the old days. His face was smudged with coal dust, and he was smiling at us like we were expected guests. "Afternoon, boys," he called out. "Y'all looking for the Garrett children? They went down by the creek to play." I felt my blood turn cold. The Garrett family had lived in this hollow back in the 1930s, but they'd all died in a car wreck in 1934. I knew because my grandfather had told me the story. And this man looked exactly like the pictures I'd seen of Thomas Garrett, who'd worked in the mine until it closed. "Sir," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady, "we're forest rangers. We're looking for 2 missing hikers." The man tilted his head like he didn't understand. "Hikers? Don't know that word. But the children are always wandering off. Been playing the same games for, well, seems like forever now." That's when I saw them. 3 kids came around the corner of the building, a boy, about 10, and 2 girls, maybe 7 and 8. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, the boy in knickers and suspenders, the girls in long dresses, and they were playing hopscotch. But their shadows were moving wrong. While the kids hopped from square to square, their shadows were dancing and twirling like they had minds of their own. Billy grabbed my arm. "We're leaving, now." I wanted to agree with him, but something held me back. Those were the Garrett children. I'd seen their pictures in the old newspaper stories about the accident. but they'd been dead for almost 30 years. "How long have you been here?" I called to the man on the porch. He scratched his head. "Time's funny in the hollow. Could be a day, could be a lifetime. The mine whistles at 6 o'clock every morning, just like always." As if summoned by his words, a mine whistle echoed through the valley. Long and mournful, the sound that used to call men to work underground. But the mine had been sealed for 70 years. The children stopped playing and loose, kedded us with eyes that were too old for their faces. The little girl, she couldn't have been more than 7, spoke up in a voice that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "Are you coming to play with us? We know such good games, games that last forever and ever." Billy was pulling on my jacket, trying to get me to move. But I couldn't stop staring at the scene in front of me. It was like looking at a photograph from 1890, except everything was moving and breathing and inviting us to join in. "The mine's open again," the boy said, pointing toward a dark opening in the hillside I hadn't noticed before. "Papa and the other men are working double shifts. They've been down there so long, they've forgotten how to come up." That's when I saw the mine entrance. It was standing wide open, with fresh timber supports and new lanterns hanging from the walls. Light spilled out from deep underground, and I could hear the sound of pickaxes and men singing work songs. But I knew for a fact that mine had been sealed solid since 1895. I'd seen the concrete barrier myself, thick as a prison wall. "Jesse," Billy whispered, and his voice was shaking. "Look at your compass." I looked down. The needle was spinning like a top, making full circles over and over, and my watch had stopped at 6 o'clock exactly. The man on the porch was still smiling at us. "Y'all should come inside. Mrs. Garrett's got fresh cornbread in the oven, and the children do love new playmates." One of the little girls started walking toward us, her shadow stretching out long and dark across the ground, reaching for our feet like it wanted to grab hold. That broke the spell. Billy and I turned and ran. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like rubber. Finally stopped by a big oak tree about half a mile upstream from the camp, both of us gasping for air. "What the hell was that?" Billy panted. I was asking myself of the same question. In 18 years of working these mountains, I'd never seen anything that couldn't be explained. But there was no explaining what we'd just witnessed. "Could be some kind of historical reenactment," I said, though even as the words came out, I knew how stupid they sounded. Reenactment with buildings that weren't there yesterday? With kids whose shadows move on their own? Billy shook his head. "And how do you explain the mine being open?" I pulled out my topographic map and spread it on the ground. According to the survey markers, we were exactly where we should be. But the map showed no buildings, no open mine, nothing but forest and the old sealed mine entrance. "Maybe we got turned around," I said. "Easy to do in thick woods like this." But I knew we hadn't gotten lost. I could navigate these mountains blindfolded. We were in the right place. It was just that the right place had become something impossible. Billy was checking his own equipment. His compass was spinning just like mine, and his watch had stopped at exactly 6 o'clock. "We need to find those missing hikers and get out of here," he said. I agreed, but something was nagging at me. The way that little girl had looked at us, with eyes too old for her face, the way she'd asked if we wanted to play games that lasted forever. We started searching in wider circles, looking for any sign of the 2 college students. Called their names until we were hoarse, but got no answer except our own echoes coming back strange and distorted. That's when Billy found the first piece of evidence. A backpack, bright blue nylon, the kind college kids carry. It was sitting on a flat rock beside the creek like someone had just set it down for a rest. "This is too new to have been here long," Billy said, checking the contents. "Sleeping bag, food for 3 days, water bottles still half full." But when I looked closer at the backpack, something was wrong with it. The fabric was starting to fade and fray around the edges, like it was aging right before our eyes. The bright blue was turning gray and dusty. "Billy, look at this." As we watched, the backpack continued to deteriorate. The zippers rusted, the fabric developed holes, and the food inside started to spoil and mold. Within 5 minutes, what had been a nearly new backpack looked like it had been sitting in the woods for decades. "That's not natural," Billy whispered. I was about to agree when we heard voices coming from downstream. Not the children this time, but adult voices. Men talking and laughing like they were having a good time. We followed the sound back toward the mining camp, staying hidden in the trees. What we saw made my stomach turn cold. The two missing hikers were there, sitting on the porch of the company store with Thomas Garrett and 3 other men I didn't recognize, all of them dressed like miners from 70 years ago. The college kids looked normal, except for their clothes. They were wearing old-fashioned work clothes instead of their hiking gear. "There they are," Billy said. "We found them." But something was wrong with the scene. The hikers were laughing and talking, but their voices sounded hollow, like they were echoing up from the bottom of a well. And their eyes looked empty, like nobody was home inside. "How long have you boys been working the mine?" I heard one of them ask. "Time's different down in the dark," one of the miners replied. "Could be a day, could be forever, but the work's always there, and the pay's always the same." That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. One of the miners was wearing a name tag that read William Hutchins, Billy's last name. I grabbed Billy's arm and whispered, "We need to get them and leave. Now." But Billy was staring at the miner with his name tag, and his face had gone pale as paper. "That's my great-grandfather," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "He died in a mining accident in Pennsylvania in 1923. But that's him. I've seen the pictures." The miner looked up from his conversation and waved at Billy like he was greeting an old friend. "Billy boy, about time you showed up for work. We've been waiting for you." Billy started walking toward the porch like he was in a trance. I grabbed his jacket and tried to pull him back, but he was stronger than me and kept moving forward. "The work's good here," his great-grandfather called out. "Steady pay and you never have to worry about going hungry. Of course, you never get to go home either, but you stop missing it after a while." "Billy, don't listen to him," I shouted. "That's not your grandfather. Your grandfather's been dead for 40 years. But Billy wasn't hearing me anymore. He was walking straight toward the porch, and the miners were standing up to welcome him with big smiles on their faces. I did the only thing I could think of. I tackled Billy from behind, and we both went tumbling into the creek. The cold water shocked him back to his senses, and he started fighting to get away from the miners who were now coming down off the porch toward us. "Run!" I yelled. We scrambled up the opposite bank and into the thick rhododendron, branches tearing at our clothes as we pushed through. Behind us, I could hear the miners calling out in voices that didn't sound quite human anymore. "Don't run, boys. The work's not hard once you get used to it, and the darkness is peaceful once you stop fighting it." We kept running until we couldn't hear the voices anymore, finally collapsed behind a big boulder, both of us shaking and trying to catch our breath. "What's happening to us?" Billy asked. I was starting to have an idea, but it was too crazy to say out loud. The mine disaster in 1895, the families who'd lived here and died, time moving strange, compasses spinning, people who should be dead walking around like nothing had happened. "I think we're in some kind of trap," I said finally. "Something that keeps people here, makes them part of whatever happened in the past." Billy's eyes were wide with fear. The hikers, they looked like they belonged there, like they'd always been there. "And your great-grandfather knew you were coming," I added. "Like this was all planned." That's when we heard the mine whistle again, echoing through the hollow. But this time it was followed by other sounds. Heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Men's voices calling our names. "Jesse Bramwell, Billy Hutchins, time to report for work." They were hunting us. We spent the night hiding in a cave about a mile upstream from the mining camp. Took turns keeping watch while the other tried to sleep, but neither of us got much rest. All through the dark hours, we could hear voices calling our names, getting closer and then farther away, like whatever was hunting us couldn't quite pin down our location. When dawn came, the voices faded away, but the cold didn't. If anything, it was getting worse. Our breath fogged thick in the air, and frost was forming on the rocks, even though it was supposed to be a warm September day. "We have to go back," I told Billy as we shared a can of cold beans for breakfast. "Those 2 kids are trapped down there, and it's our job to get them out." Billy shook his head. "They looked happy, Jesse. Maybe they want to stay." Nobody wants to stay with dead people, I said. Whatever's got hold of them, it's not natural. But even as I said it, I was starting to wonder if we could trust our own minds anymore. The whole experience felt like a dream you can't wake up from, where things that should be impossible seem perfectly normal. We made our way back toward the camp, staying in the trees and moving quiet as we could. The company store was still there, looking just as real as it had the day before. But now there were more buildings, a whole row of company houses with smoke coming from their chimneys, and what looked like a schoolhouse with children's voices singing inside. "And it's growing," Billy whispered. "The place is getting bigger." He was right. What had been just ruins and foundations yesterday was now a complete mining town, bustling with activity. Men, in work clothes, walking between the buildings, women hanging laundry on lines, children playing in the dirt streets. And at the center of it all, the mine entrance stood wide open like a mouth waiting to swallow us up. "There," Billy pointed. "I can see them." The two college hikers were standing near the mine entrance with a group of miners. They still looked like themselves, but their clothes had changed to work uniforms and they were carrying lunch pails like they'd been doing this for years. As we watched, the group of miners started walking into the mine. The hikers went with them, not looking back, not showing any sign they wanted to escape. "We have to stop them," I said. But before we could move, someone spoke behind us. "You boys really should come join the work crew." We spun around to find a man standing there who looked like he was made of shadows and coal dust. His face kept shifting, sometimes looking like one person, sometimes like another, as if he was all the dead miners combined into one being. "I'm the foreman," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Been waiting 70 years for this crew to be complete. Just need 2 more workers to fill the quota." I pulled Billy behind me and backed away from the thing. "We're not miners. We're forest rangers." The foreman laughed, and the sound echoed from all directions at once. "Everyone's a miner down in the dark. Doctor, lawyer, forest ranger, doesn't matter once you're underground. The work makes everyone the same." Billy was shaking so hard I could feel it through his jacket. "What do you want from us?" "Same thing I wanted from them." The foreman pointed toward the mine entrance where the college kids had disappeared. "Company. Been lonely down in the dark all these years. The original crew, they're worn thin now, just echoes of themselves. Need fresh blood to keep the work going." "The mine's been closed for 70 years, I said. "There's no work to do." "Oh, there's always work." The foreman's face shifted again, showing features I almost recognized. "Digging deeper, finding new veins, expanding the tunnels. Building a world where the living and the dead can work side by side forever." That's when I understood what was really happening. The mine disaster hadn't just killed 47 men. It had created something that fed on death, that collected the living to join the dead in their eternal work. "The cave-in," I said. "It didn't just trap the miners. It created some kind of pocket, a place where death doesn't work right." The foreman nodded approvingly. "Smart man." "Yes. When the mountain fell and trapped us all, something broke. Time, space, the line between life and death. We've been waiting ever since, for enough living souls to make the repair. Fix what was broken, so we can all go home." "But you can't go home," Billy said, finding his voice. "You're dead." "Are we?" The foreman's form flickered like a candle in the wind. "Hard to tell anymore. Been so long since we've seen sunlight, felt rain on our faces. But with enough living souls to anchor us, we might remember what it was like to be alive." I felt in my pocket for the small Bible my grandmother had given me when I started working in the mountains. She'd made me promise to carry it, said it would keep me safe in dark places. Never believed in that kind of thing, but right now I was willing to try anything. "You can't force people to stay here," I said, gripping the Bible tight. The foreman tilted his head. "Can't I? Your young friends seem happy enough. And your partner here, his family's already part of the crew. Won't be long before he joins them." I looked at Billy and saw that his eyes were starting to go empty, just like the college hikers. Whatever force was at work here, it was getting stronger. "Fight it," I told him. Remember who you are. Remember why you came here. But Billy was already walking toward the mine entrance, his feet crunching on the gravel like he'd done this walk 1,000 times before. The foreman laughed again. One more to go. Come along, Ranger Bramwell. Time to report for your shift. I pulled out the Bible and held it in front of me like a shield. I know who I am. I know where I belong. And it's not down in your mine. The foreman's face twisted with anger, and for a moment I could see all 47 dead miners staring at me with hollow eyes. You'll come eventually, he said. They always do. Time moves different here, and we have nothing but time. That's when I heard Billy's voice echoing up from the mine shaft, but it sounded wrong, like he was already miles underground. Jesse, help me! I can't find the way out! I had a choice to make, and I had about 2 seconds to make it. Follow Billy into the mine and probably get trapped forever with the rest of them, or run and leave him to whatever fate was waiting down in the dark. But I'd been a ranger for 18 years, and rangers don't leave people behind. I gripped my grandmother's Bible and ran straight toward the mine entrance. The foreman tried to grab me, but his shadowy hands passed right through my body like smoke. The living world still has a hold on you, he snarled, but not for long. The mine tunnel was lit by lanterns that cast flickering shadows on the walls. I could hear voices ahead of me, Billy calling for help, the college hikers talking to miners who'd been dead for decades, pickaxes ringing against stone deep in the earth. As I went deeper, the temperature kept dropping until my breath came out in thick white puffs. The tunnel branched off in directions that hadn't existed when the mine was built, stretching away into darkness that seemed to go on forever. Billy, I called out, and follow my voice. Jesse, I can't see you. Everything looks the same down here. I followed the sound of his voice through twisting passages that defied all logic. Some sloped up when they should have gone down, others curved back on themselves like they were designed to confuse anyone who tried to navigate them. Finally, I found him in a wide chamber carved out of solid rock. He was standing with the 2 college hikers and about a dozen miners, all of them holding pickaxes and staring at me with those empty eyes. There you are, Billy said, but his voice sounded hollow like the others. We've been waiting for you to start the shift. I held up the Bible. Billy, remember who you are. You're not a miner. You're a forest ranger from Ohio. You came here to help people, not to dig in a mine that's been closed for 70 years. For just a moment his eyes cleared, and he looked like himself again. Jesse, what's happening to me? Something that feeds on death, I said. Something that wants to keep us here forever. But we don't belong to it. The miners started moving closer, their pickaxes raised like weapons. Behind them, I could see the foreman's shifting form, and his face was twisted with rage. You can't take them, he growled. They're mine now. The mountain gave them to me when it took my men. I opened the Bible to a passage my grandmother had made me memorize. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. The miners stopped moving. Some of them started to flicker like bad television reception. He restores my soul, I continued. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Billy shook his head like he was waking up from a deep sleep. Jesse, we have to get out of here. But the college hikers were backing away from us, still under the mine's influence. I grabbed Billy's arm and started pulling him toward what I hoped was the way out. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you, oh, are with me. The mine tunnel started shaking, dust falling from the ceiling. Behind us, the foreman was screaming in a voice like grinding metal. You can't leave. No one leaves. The work must continue. We ran through passages that seemed to shift and change as we moved through them. Sometimes I could see daylight ahead, sometimes just more darkness. But I kept reciting the psalm, and Billy held on to my jacket, and somehow we kept moving towards something that felt like the real world. The shaking got worse. Rocks started falling from the ceiling, and I could hear the mine collapsing behind us. The foreman's voice echoed through the tunnels one last time. "This isn't over, Bramwell. The mountain remembers. The debt will be paid." Then we were stumbling out into daylight, gasping and coughing up coal dust. Behind us, the mine entrance collapsed with a roar like thunder, sealing itself up again with rocks and earth. Billy collapsed to his knees, shaking all over. "The hikers," he said. "We left them down there." I looked back at the sealed mine entrance. There was no way to dig through all that rock, not with the equipment we had. And even if we could, would we find anything but empty tunnels? "Maybe they found another way out," I said. But we both knew that wasn't true. We made our way back to the truck in silence. The mining camp was gone, just old foundations and rusted metal like it had always been. No company store, no houses, no sign that anyone had lived there for decades. But when we got to the truck, there were 2 more backpacks sitting on the hood, college student backpacks, with identification tags for the 2 hikers we'd been looking for. Inside, the packs were personal belongings, clothes, and a journal. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. "Camping near old mine tonight. Beautiful place. Feel like we could stay here forever." Billy and I never talked about what happened in detail. Filed our report as a climbing accident, said the students must have fallen into a crevice or been caught in a rock slide. Happens sometimes in old mining area. This is where the ground isn't stable. But I know the truth. Those 2 kids are still down there, working shifts that never end in a mine that officially doesn't exist. And sometimes, on cold nights when the fog rolls thick through the valleys, I can hear the mine whistle calling across the mountains. The hollow folk are still there, waiting for the next visitors who get curious about the old stories, waiting to fill their quota and finally find their way home. I retired from the Forest Service 2 years later. Couldn't bring myself to patrol those deep valleys anymore. But I still live in these mountains, and I still hear things that make the hair on my neck stand up. If you ever find yourself hiking in the George Washington National Forest, stay away from Panther Creek Hollow. Especially if the temperature drops sudden-like, or your compass starts spinning, or you hear children laughing where there shouldn't be any children. Some places in these old mountains don't follow the rules the rest of the world lives by. Some places remember things that should have been forgotten long ago, and some places are still hungry. My name is Ezra Redmond, and I've been pulling people off these mountains for 15 years. Dead or alive, that's my job. Park ranger for the Monongahela National Forest, specializing in high-altitude rescue. I know every trail, every cliff, every cave in these West Virginia peaks. I've saved over 200 people in my time here, but I've never told anyone about what happened in Moonshine Hollow that December. Not until now. It was 1979, early December. The kind of cold that bites through 3 layers of wool and makes your breath freeze in your beard. A blizzard had been dumping snow for 2 days straight, and we had a family missing. The Pattersons, parents and 2 kids, ages 8 and 10, last seen camping near Dolly Sods, but their car was found abandoned at the Moonshine Hollow trailhead. Moonshine Hollow. Even the name made the old-timers shake their heads. Back in the 1920s, it was home to the biggest moonshine operation in the county. Until the fire. A whole family of moonshiners burned up in their cabin, including 5 children. Folks said you could still smell smoke on certain nights, still hear children playing in the woods. I never believed that nonsense. Mountain people love their ghost stories, but ghosts don't rescue hypothermia victims. Training and equipment do. My partner Jake Martinez and I geared up at dawn, snowshoes, thermal gear, emergency medical supplies, avalanche beacons. The works. Jake was younger than me, only been on the force 3 years, but he was solid. Good instincts, strong climber. "Hell of a storm to be camping in," Jake said, checking his radio. "City folks," I replied, testing my own equipment. "Probably figured they'd have a nice romantic winter getaway. Don't understand how fast weather changes up here." The helicopter couldn't fly in the storm, so we'd have to reach them on foot. 4 miles of hiking through knee-deep snow, then down into the hollow itself. The wind was howling so loud we had to shout to hear each other. We found their abandoned campsite first. Tent collapsed under snow, sleeping bags scattered. But here's what bothered me. No sign of struggle, no panic, like they'd just walked away in the middle of setting up camp. "Ezra," Jake called from about 20 yards away. "You need to see this." I snowshoed over to where he was crouched. In the snow were footprints, small ones, child-sized. "Fresh," Jake said, pointing. "Maybe an hour old." I knelt down to examine them. The prints were clear, sharp-edged, but they led straight toward a cliff face. I followed them with my eyes, counting steps. The trail went right to the rock wall and stopped. "Kids must have doubled back," I said. "Wind probably covered their return prints." But something felt wrong. The hollow was too quiet. Even in a blizzard, you hear wind through trees, snow falling from branches. Here the silence felt heavy, like the air before lightning strikes. We followed a different set of adult prints, presumably the parents', deeper into the hollow. The old moonshine site was somewhere down here, though most people couldn't find it anymore. The trees grew thick and the trails were mostly overgrown. That's when we heard it. Children laughing. Jake stopped dead in his tracks. "You hear that?" I held up my hand for quiet, straining to listen. There it was again. High, clear laughter, the sound kids make when they're having the time of their lives. But it was coming from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the rocks in impossible ways. "Hello!" I shouted. "Patterson family, this is the Park Service." The laughter stopped. Complete silence returned. Jake's face was pale. Where did that come from? "Sound carries weird in this terrain," I said, but my heart was pounding. "Let's keep moving." We pressed deeper into the hollow. The snow was getting deeper, drifts up to our waists in some places. But here and there, I noticed patches where the snow had melted completely, leaving bare ground in perfect circles about 4 feet across. The circles were warm to the touch. "Underground hot springs," I told Jake, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Hot springs would create steam, and the melted areas would be larger and irregular. These were perfect circles, like someone had been lying in the snow. We found more footprints, dozens of them now, all child-sized, all fresh. They crisscrossed through the trees, around rocks, up and down slopes that would challenge an experienced hiker, let alone kids. And they all seemed to be leading to the same place, the old moonshine site. I'd never actually seen the ruins before, though I'd heard about them my whole life. My grandfather used to tell stories about the family that died here, the Washburns. They'd run moonshine through these mountains for years before the fire took them all. What was left wasn't much. Foundation stones from a cabin, a collapsed chimney, and the stone remains of their still. But the strangest thing was how clean it all looked, like someone had been maintaining it. In the center of the ruins, we found something that made my blood run cold. A neat pile of children's toys. Not old toys from the 1920s. Modern toys. A Rubik's Cube. A Star Wars action figure. A Slinky. And underneath those, older things. A wooden spinning top, a rag doll, a set of jacks. "Ezra," Jake whispered. "This is wrong. This is all wrong." I picked up the action figure. It was Luke Skywalker, still in decent condition despite being out in the weather. The toy couldn't be more than a year or two old. That's when I noticed Jake staring at something behind me. I turned around. Fresh snow angels, 5 of them, perfectly formed, right next to the ruins. But the snow around them showed no footprints, no sign of anyone making them. "We need to find that family," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now." Our radio crackled to life. Static filled with what sounded like voices, children's voices. "Help us," came a clear transmission. "We're cold. We're so cold." Jake fumbled with his radio. "This is Ranger Martinez. Who is this? What's your location?" More static, then, "We want to play. Come play with us." The voices were different now. Older, like they were speaking through old-fashioned radio equipment, the kind they might have had in the 1920s. I grabbed Jake's radio. "Patterson family, if you can hear this, we are park rangers here to help. Stay where you are and keep warm." "The fire's gone out," came a small voice. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. "Daddy can't get it started again. It's so cold here." Jake and I looked at each other. The Pattersons had 2 boys, not a girl. "What's your name, honey?" I asked into the radio. "Mary Catherine. Mary Catherine Washburn. Are you coming to help us?" The radio went dead. I knew that name. Mary Catherine Washburn was one of the children who died in the 1929 fire. I'd heard the story 100 times. She was 6 years old. "We need to get out of here," Jake said. His hands were shaking, and not from the cold. "There's a family out here somewhere," I replied. "Real people who need our help. We're not leaving." But even as I said it, I could feel something watching us from the trees. I turned slowly, scanning the forest. Nothing. Just snow-covered pines and bare hardwoods. Then I saw them. 2 children, maybe 50 yards away, standing between the trees. A boy and a girl, wearing old-fashioned clothes, long coats and knit caps, the kind kids wore decades ago. They were perfectly still, just watching us. I blinked, and they were gone. "Jake," I said quietly, "did you see?" "Yeah," he breathed. "I saw them." We started hiking toward where the children had been standing. The snow was shallower here, and we could move faster. But with each step, and the feeling of being watched got stronger. The temperature was rising too, which made no sense. It had been below 0 all morning, but now it felt almost comfortable. I unzipped my parka. We found more toys scattered through the trees. A teddy bear hanging from a branch. A wooden train set arranged in a perfect circle around a tree trunk. A jump rope tied between 2 saplings, still swinging slightly in the windless air. "This is like some kind of outdoor playroom," Jake said. That's when we heard the voices again. Not on the radio this time, but in person. Children calling to each other, their voices echoing through the hollow. "Come find us! We're hiding! Ready or not!" Hide and seek. They were playing hide and seek. I cupped my hands around my mouth. "Patterson children! Tommy! Michael! Answer me if you can hear this!" The voices stopped. Then from directly behind us, "Who are Tommy and Michael?" I spun around. A little girl stood about 10 feet away, wearing a blue wool coat and black boots. Her hair was in pigtails tied with ribbons. She looked solid, real, but I could see the trees behind her through her body. "Where are the Patterson boys?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The family that was camping here?" She tilted her head like she was thinking. "Oh, the new children. They're playing with us now. We don't get new friends very often." Jake had gone completely white. I could hear his breathing, fast and shallow. "Where are they playing?" I asked. The girl smiled. "Come on, I'll show you." She turned and started walking deeper into the hollow. After a few steps, she looked back at us. "Don't you want to play too? It's fun here. We play all the time." I looked at Jake. He was staring at the girl with wide eyes. "She's not real," he whispered. "This isn't happening." But I could see our breath misting in the cold air. I could feel the snow crunching under my boots. Everything felt real. The girl was getting farther away, but she didn't seem to be walking. She was just moving, floating over the snow without leaving footprints. "Wait," I called and started after her. That's when I heard Jake scream. I turned back to see Jake surrounded by children. 5, maybe 6 kids, all wearing old-fashioned clothes. They were holding hands around him in a circle like they were playing Ring Around the Rosie. But Jake wasn't playing. He was terrified, trying to break free, but the children's grip seemed to hold him in place. "Let him go!" I shouted, running toward them. The children looked at me with identical expressions of confusion. "We're just playing," said a boy who couldn't have been more than 8. "He wants to play too, don't you?" he asked Jake. Jake's eyes were wild with panic. "Ezra, I can't move. I can't move my legs." I reached the circle and tried to grab Jake's arm, but my hand passed right through the children like they were made of cold mist. Yet somehow they could still hold Jake. "Ring Around the Rosie," the children began singing. "Pocket full of posies." "Stop it," I yelled. "Let him go." "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The children collapsed to the ground, pulling Jake with them. He hit the snow hard and lay there, breathing heavily. When I looked again, the children were gone. "What the hell was that?" Jake gasped, struggling to sit up. I helped him to his feet. His face was pale and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Hypothermia," I said, trying to convince myself. "Makes you hallucinate. We need to find shelter and get warm." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I'd seen hypothermia before. This was something else. We kept hiking, following what looked like a trail deeper into the hollow. The trees here were different, older, twisted into strange shapes. Many of them had symbols carved into their bark. Not recent carvings, but old ones, worn smooth by decades of weather. The symbols looked like children's drawings. Stick figures holding hands, houses with smiling suns. Above them, flowers and trees and simple animals. "Kids have been coming here for years," Jake said, running his fingers over one of the carvings. "Decades, maybe. Or the same kids have been here the whole time," I muttered. We found them 20 minutes later. Tommy and Michael Patterson, ages 8 and 10, sitting in a circle with a dozen other children in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. They were playing some kind of game with stones, taking turns tossing them into the center of the circle. The other children were all wearing clothes from different time periods, some in 1920s overalls and knit sweaters, others in 1940s school clothes, a few in 1960s play clothes. One little girl wore a dress that looked like it came from the early 1800s. "Tommy! Michael!" I called out. The two boys looked up at me with glassy eyes. They seemed happy but distant, like they were dreaming. "Time to go home, boys," I said, walking toward them. "Your parents are worried." "We're playing a game," Tommy said. "It's fun." "Want to play?" "Come on," I said, reaching for his hand. "We need to get you somewhere warm." The moment I touched Tommy, cold shot up my arm like electricity. Not the cold of winter air, but something deeper. The cold of underground caves, of deep water, of places where sunlight never reaches. I jerked my hand back. Tommy was looking at me with eyes that seemed much older than 10 years old. "The game isn't finished yet," he said in a voice that didn't sound quite like a child's anymore. The other children had stopped their game and were staring at me. None of them seemed to be breathing. Their chests weren't moving up and down. No white puffs of breath in the cold air. "Where are your parents, Tommy?" I asked. He pointed deeper into the hollow. "They're playing the sleeping game. It's really fun. You get so tired that you sleep and never wake up." My heart started pounding. "Show me where they are, now!" Tommy stood up and so did all the other children. They moved together, like they shared the same mind. We followed them to a small cave, entrance hidden behind some rocks. Inside, I could see 2 adult figures lying on the ground, covered in snow that had blown in through the opening. I pulled out my flashlight and went in. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson were unconscious, their skin blue with cold. But they were still breathing, barely. "Jake!" I yelled. "Get the emergency blankets, now!" While Jake set up our portable shelter, I checked the Pattersons' vital signs. Severe hypothermia, but they might make it if we could get them warm and get medical help. When I looked back outside, the children were gone. All of them, including Tommy and Michael. "Where did they go?" Jake asked. I stepped out of the cave and called their names. No answer. But I could hear laughter again, echoing from somewhere deeper in the hollow. We couldn't leave the parents, but we couldn't let the boys wander off with whatever those other children were. "Stay with the parents," I told Jake. "Try to get them warmed up. I'm going after the kids." "Don't leave me here alone," Jake said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "You'll be fine. Just keep them warm and try the radio. Maybe you can reach base camp." I followed the laughter deeper into the hollow. The trail led to places I'd never seen before, even after 15 years in these mountains. Rock formations that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Trees that grew in perfect circles. Streams that flowed upward over rocks instead of down. I found them in a place that shouldn't have existed. It was like a natural amphitheater, a bowl-shaped clearing surrounded by cliffs on all sides. But the clearing was warm, maybe 70 degrees, with no snow on the ground. Green grass grew in patches, and I could hear insects buzzing. In the center of the clearing stood the ruins of a large building. Not just a cabin this time, but something bigger. Maybe a school or church. Tommy and Michael Patterson sat on the steps with about 20 other children, all in clothes from different time periods. They were singing. Not a song I recognized, but something old, in a minor key that made my skin crawl. At the front of the group stood a boy who looked to be about 12 years old. He wore overalls and a white shirt, both stained with what looked like soot. His face was pale, and when he turned to look at me, I saw that his eyes were completely black. "Welcome," he said, and his voice echoed strangely in the clearing. "We've been waiting for you." "I'm Ezra Redmond," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Park ranger. I'm here to take Tommy and Michael home." The boy in overalls smiled, showing teeth that were too white, too sharp. "I'm Billy Washburn. This is my family." He gestured to the other children. "And these are our friends. They came to play with us." Billy Washburn. I knew that name too. He was the oldest of the Washburn children who died in the 1929 fire. According to the stories, he'd been playing with matches in the barn when the fire started. "Tommy, Michael," I called. "Come here, boys. Time to go home." Neither boy moved. They just kept singing with the others, their voices blending into that strange, haunting melody. "They don't want to go home," Billy said. "They like it here. We all like it here. We get to play forever and ever." I took a step closer. "Their parents are worried. They need to go back." "Parents get old," Billy said. "Parents die. But children can play forever if they know the right games." The temperature in the clearing was rising. It was getting uncomfortably warm, and I could smell smoke. Not wood smoke, but something else. Something that had been burning for a very long time. "What happened to you, Billy?" I asked. "To all of you?" His black eyes seemed to look right through me. "We were playing. Just playing. But then the fire came, and we got so hot, and then we got so cold. But it's better now. We found out how to stay warm forever." More children began appearing around the edges of the clearing. Dozens of them, all different ages, all wearing clothes from different decades. Some looked like they'd been in the mountains recently. Their clothes were modern, their hair cut in current styles. Others looked like they'd been here much longer. "How many children have come here?" I asked. Billy tilted his head, counting silently. "Hard to remember, but each one teaches us new games. The boy from 1945 taught us marbles. The girl from 1963 taught us hopscotch. The twins from last winter taught us about something called video games, but we can't play those here." Last winter. How many families had gone missing in these mountains? How many had we written off as hiking accidents? "You can't keep them," I said. "They have families who love them." "Love?" Billy laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Love ends. Love grows old and dies. But games are forever." I realized then what I was dealing with. These weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They were children who had died but refused to accept it, who had found a way to keep playing by trapping other children in their endless games. "The Patterson boys need to go home," I said firmly. Billy's expression changed. The innocent confusion was replaced by something much older, much colder. "No," he said simply. "They're our friends now. And so are you." The other children started moving closer, forming a circle around me. I could see through some of them, but others looked solid, real. "We've been lonely," said a little girl in a 1950s dress. "So lonely for so long. But now we have new friends," said a boy in 1970s clothes. "Forever and ever," they chanted together. "Forever and ever." I reached for my radio, but it was gone. My pack was gone too. Somehow, without me noticing, everything had disappeared except my clothes. "Don't be scared," Billy said, walking closer. "It doesn't hurt. You just get sleepy and you wake up, and then you can play with us." I looked at Tommy and Michael. They were still singing, but now they looked translucent, like the other children. They were fading. "No," I said, backing away. "This is wrong. You're children. You should be protecting other children, not hurting them." "We're not hurting them," Billy said, sounding genuinely confused. "We're saving them from growing up, from getting old and sad and dying alone." I thought about my own childhood then, playing in these same mountains, building forts, catching fireflies. The pure joy of being a kid, when the whole world seemed magical and full of possibilities. "Billy," I said, "do you remember what it was like, being alive?" For just a moment, his black eyes flickered. "We are alive." "No," I said gently. "You're not. You died in the fire. All of you died. But you're holding on to something that's already gone." The chanting stopped. All the children were staring at me now. "You died," I continued. "But that doesn't mean you have to take other children with you. Tommy and Michael have parents who love them. They have whole lives ahead of them." Billy's face was changing, becoming younger somehow. The black was fading from his eyes. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember Mama reading to us at night, and Papa teaching me to whittle, and Mary Catherine's laugh when we played hide and seek." The little girl I'd met earlier, Mary Catherine, stepped forward. She looked solid now, real. "Billy," she said in a small voice, "I want to go home." "We can't go home," Billy said, tears starting to flow down his cheeks. "Home burned down. We burned down." "Then let them go home," I said, pointing to Tommy and Michael. "Let all the children go home." Billy looked around at the other children, at the decades of kids who had been trapped here. "But we'll be alone again. You have each other," I said. "You always have." He was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "Tommy," he called. "Michael, time to wake up." The two boys blinked, looking around in confusion. Color was returning to their faces. "Where are we?" Tommy asked. "Time to go home," I said, taking their hands. This time, they felt warm and alive. As we walked away from the clearing, I heard Billy's voice one last time. "Tell people about us. Tell them we were here. Tell them we were real." I turned back, but the clearing was empty, just snow-covered ground and bare trees. We found our way back to Jake and the Patterson parents just as the rescue helicopter arrived. The storm had cleared, and we were able to get the whole family out safely. The official report listed it as a case of hypothermia and exposure. The family had become disoriented in the storm and taken shelter in a cave. The children had mild frostbite but recovered completely. Jake quit the Park Service 2 weeks later, said he was moving to Florida, somewhere flat and warm. He never talked about what happened in Moonshine Hollow, but I saw him once at a bar in town, and he looked 10 years older. The Patterson family recovered physically, but they moved away from West Virginia within a month. Mrs. Patterson called me once to thank me for finding them, but when I tried to ask about what the boys remembered, she hung up. I still work these mountains, but I've never been back to Moonshine Hollow. The trail has been officially closed since 1980, after too many hiking accidents in that area. Sometimes, on quiet winter nights, I get calls on my radio. Children's voices, asking me to come play. I always turn the radio off, but I can still hear them sometimes, laughing in the wind. I've done some research since then. The Washburn family fire in 1929, the missing children over the decades. At least 30 kids have disappeared in that area since the 1930s, always in winter, always during storms. Most people assume they got lost and died of exposure. But I know the truth. They're still there, playing games that never end, and ever, winter, they look for new friends. If you ever find yourself hiking in the West Virginia mountains and you hear children laughing in the woods, my advice is simple. Don't go looking for them. Don't try to help, just turn around and walk away as fast as you can. Because some games, once you start playing, you can never stop. My name is Ruth Hawthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I protect the old places in Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest, especially the cave systems around Red River Gorge. Before this job, I spent 6 years as an archaeologist, digging up pottery shards and arrow points. I thought I knew every kind of darkness that could hide in these limestone caves. I was wrong. It was mid-November 1974 when everything started. The trees were bare, and a cold drizzle had been falling for 3 days straight, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and makes you want to stay inside. But I had a job to do. Someone had called in an illegal excavation up on Copperhead Ridge, and it was my responsibility to check it out. Copperhead Ridge sits about 12 miles from the nearest road. You have to hike through thick woods and climb over slippery rocks to get there. The ridge got its name for good reason. Those caves are full of poisonous snakes. Most people stay away. That's probably why someone thought they could dig there without getting caught. I loaded my backpack with the usual gear, camera, evidence bags, measuring tape, and my notebook. I also brought my spelunking equipment just in case. The caves up there go deep into the mountain, some of them unexplored. As an archaeologist, I'd cataloged over 200 cave systems in the area. I knew which ones held Native American artifacts and which ones were just empty holes in the rock. The hike up took me 2 hours. My boots squelched in the mud with every step. The rain made everything slippery and dangerous. Twice I had to grab onto tree branches to keep from sliding down the steep slopes. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. When I finally reached Copperhead Ridge, I found the disturbed earth right away. Someone had been digging near the main cave entrance. Fresh dirt was piled up in uneven mounds. Whoever did this work wasn't careful about it. They'd scattered broken pottery and old bones all over the ground. My first thought was grave robbers. It happens more than people think. Someone hears stories about valuable Indian artifacts and decides to get rich quick. They don't care about destroying history or showing respect for the dead. I started taking pictures and making notes. The site was a mess. Ancient pottery mixed with fresh dirt. Animal bones scattered everywhere. But as I worked, something began to bother me. Some of the bones looked too white, too clean, like they hadn't been in the ground very long. I picked up what I thought was an old deer bone. When I looked closer, I realized it wasn't from a deer at all. It was human. A human arm bone, and it couldn't have been buried more than a few months ago. That's when I noticed the smell. Sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. The odor was coming from deeper in the cave. I should have left right then, should have hiked back down the mountain and called the state police. But 13 years of ranger work had taught me to investigate first and ask questions later. I put on my headlamp and stepped into the cave. The tunnel sloped downward into darkness. Water dripped from the ceiling and my footsteps echoed off the walls. The smell got stronger as I went deeper. About 50 feet in, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. What I saw there made me stop breathing. The chamber was full of bones, not scattered around like at an archaeological site, but arranged, organized. Hundreds of human skulls lined the walls like decorations. Arm bones and leg bones were stacked in neat piles. Rib cages hung from the ceiling like chandeliers. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that some of the bones were still wet. Forced myself to stay calm and think like a scientist. This could be an old burial ground. Some Native American tribes did practice secondary burial, where they would clean the bones and arrange them in special patterns. But this didn't look like any Native American burial practice I'd ever studied. I started taking pictures. Through the camera lens, I noticed something that made my hands shake. In several of the photos, there appeared to be people standing among the bones. But when I looked up from the camera, the chamber was empty except for me. I told myself it was just shadows playing tricks. The cave lighting was poor, and I was stressed about finding human remains. My mind was making patterns where none existed. I moved deeper into the chamber, documenting everything I saw. The bones weren't just arranged. They were built into structures. Walls made of skulls and leg bones. Benches constructed from rib cages. At the far end of the chamber stood something that looked like an altar. It was made entirely of human spines, twisted together like rope. That's when I heard the singing. It started as a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. But as I stood still and listened, the sound grew louder, voices singing hymns in words I couldn't understand. The music seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, The walls, the ceiling, even the bones themselves. I clicked on my tape recorder, hoping to capture evidence of what I was hearing. But when I played it back, there was only silence and the sound of dripping water. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Cave acoustics can do strange things to sound. Maybe there were people singing somewhere else in the mountain, and the sound was carrying through connected passages. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong here. I decided to explore a little further before leaving. There were 3 other tunnels leading out of the bone chamber. I chose the one on the right and started walking. This tunnel was different from the first one. The walls weren't natural limestone anymore. They were built from human bones, mortared together with something dark and sticky. Every few feet, I found small alcoves carved into the walls. Each alcove held a single skull, and every skull was facing the same direction, deeper into the mountain. The singing got louder as I followed the tunnel. Now I could make out individual voices, maybe 6 or 7 people singing together. The melody was beautiful, but sad, like a funeral song. After about 100 feet, the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was smaller than the first, but it held something that made me gasp out loud. In the center of the room sat a man in a wooden chair. He was wearing a black suit and a white collar, like an old-fashioned preacher. His hands were folded in his lap, and his head was bowed like he was praying. At first, I thought he was dead. He sat perfectly still, not breathing. But as I stepped closer, he raised his head and looked right at me. "Welcome, sister," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "We've been waiting for you." That's when I saw his face clearly in my headlamp beam. Half of it was normal human skin and features. The other half was bone, clean, white bone where flesh should have been. His left eye socket was empty, just a dark hole in his skull. I ran. I dropped my camera and my notebook and ran back through the bone tunnel as fast as my legs would carry me. Behind me, I could hear laughter mixing with the singing. The sound followed me through the chambers and out into the main cave entrance. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck at the bottom of the mountain. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I should have driven straight to the state police. Should have called in the FBI, the National Guard, anybody with more authority and better weapons than me. Instead, I went home and tried to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. Stress, I told myself. Too many years working alone in dangerous places. Maybe I'd been breathing bad air in the cave or hit my head on a low ceiling without realizing it. There had to be a rational explanation. But 3 days later, Dr. James Mills called me from the State Archaeology Office. "Ruth, I got your report about the excavation on Copperhead Ridge," he said. "This sounds like something we need to investigate together. I'm driving up tomorrow morning." I tried to talk him out of it, told him the site wasn't safe, that we should wait and come back with a full team. But Jim had always been stubborn about his work. He'd been the state archaeologist for 20 years, and he'd never met a dig site he didn't want to explore personally. He arrived the next morning in his beat-up station wagon, loaded down with proper archaeological equipment. Screens for sifting dirt, brushes for delicate work, and a professional camera with multiple lenses. "This could be the find of a lifetime, Ruth," he said as we hiked up to the ridge. "If there's really an intact burial site up here, it could change everything we know about pre-Columbian cultures in Kentucky." I tried to warn him about what I'd seen, but I couldn't find words that didn't make me sound crazy. How do you tell a respected scientist that you met a half-skeleton preacher in a church made of human bones? When we reached the cave entrance, the first thing I noticed was that all the scattered bones from my previous visit were gone. The disturbed earth had been smoothed over and covered with fresh leaves. If I hadn't known exactly where to look, I never would have found the excavation site. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Jim asked, looking around with confusion. I was sure, but now I was also scared. We entered the cave together, both of us wearing headlamps and carrying full packs of equipment. The tunnel looked exactly the same as before, sloping down into darkness. But when we reached the large chamber, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was different, bigger. The bone walls had grown taller, and new alcoves had been carved into the limestone. The skull chandelier now held twice as many rib cages, and at the center of the room, where the altar had been, stood a complete human skeleton arranged in a praying position. "My God," Jim whispered. "Ruth, this is incredible. Look at the preservation on these remains. Some of these bones look like they were cleaned yesterday." He was right. That was exactly what they looked like. Jim immediately started setting up his equipment, photographing everything from multiple angles. He was so excited he was practically dancing around the chamber. I tried to stay close to him, but the place felt different now, more alive. The bones seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Jim," I said, "I think we should leave. We can come back with more people, better equipment." "Are you kidding?" He looked at me like I'd suggested burning down a library. "Ruth, this is the discovery of the century. We can't leave now." That's when we both heard the singing. This time it was louder, clearer, 6 or 7 voices singing in perfect harmony. The melody was beautiful, but strange, like no hymn I'd ever heard before. Jim froze with his camera halfway to his face. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I nodded, relieved that I wasn't going crazy. "Where's it coming from?" Before I could answer, the singing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the music had been. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, measured steps coming from one of the side tunnels. Jim grabbed my arm, and we both stared at the tunnel entrance. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the preacher I'd seen before, but he looked different now. The bone side of his face had grown larger, spreading across his forehead and down his neck. His black suit was cleaner, pressed, and new-looking. "Dr. Mills," the preacher said, his voice echoing off the chamber and above our walls. "We've been expecting you." Jim's grip on my arm loosened. Instead of fear, I saw fascination in his eyes. "How do you know my name?" Jim asked. The preacher smiled with half a mouth. "We know many things, Doctor. We know you've spent your whole life studying the bones of the dead. We know you've always wondered what they might tell you if they could speak." That's just academic curiosity," Jim said. But he was moving toward the preacher instead of away from him. "Jim, don't," I warned, but he wasn't listening to me anymore. "Would you like to hear what the bones have to say?" the preacher asked. That's when the other voices started, whispers at first, then louder. They were coming from the skulls lining the walls, from the rib cages hanging above us, from every bone in the chamber. Hundreds of voices speaking at once, telling stories of their lives, their deaths, their hopes and fears and secrets. Jim stood transfixed in the middle of it all, listening with an expression of pure wonder on his face. "Jim!" I shouted over the voices. "We have to go. Now!" But when I reached for his arm, my hand passed right through him. He was still there, but somehow not solid anymore, like he was becoming part of the cave itself. The preacher looked at me and nodded approvingly. "Your friend has accepted our invitation, Miss Hawthorne. Soon he will be able to share his own stories with us. Forever." That's when I ran again. But this time, I could hear Jim calling after me. Not for help, but asking me to come back, begging me to stay and listen to the beautiful voices of the dead. I made it out of the cave and down the mountain without stopping. When I reached the parking area, Jim's station wagon was still there next to my truck. I waited until dark, hoping he would come back on his own. But he never did. The next morning I drove back up to search for him. I found his equipment scattered around the cave entrance. His camera, his brushes, his notebook with half-finished sketches of bone arrangements. I also found something else, a fresh human ski. Latan, perfectly clean and white, arranged in a praying position at the center of the bone chamber. It was wearing Jim's wedding ring. I should have called for help then. Should have brought in the police, the FBI, the National Guard. Instead, I spent the next week researching everything I could find about Copperhead Ridge and the religious groups that had lived in the area. What I found made everything worse. In 1847, a sect called the Eternal Congregation had established a settlement near the ridge. They believed that death was not the end of existence, but a transformation. By consuming the sins of others, literally eating parts of dead bodies, they thought they could achieve immortal life. The sect had disappeared mysteriously in 1851. According to local records, a cave-in had trapped the entire congregation underground. Their bodies were never recovered, but I was beginning to suspect they had never really died. I also found something else in my research, a family name that appeared over and over in connection with the sect: Hendricks. The Hendricks family had been the original leaders of the Eternal Congregation, and according to current phone records, 3 families named Hendricks still lived in the area. I knew I had to go back to the cave. Not because I wanted to, but because I was the only person who knew the truth about what was happening there. If the Eternal Congregation was still active, still killing people and adding their bones to the church, someone had to stop them. This time, I came prepared. I brought spelunking rope, emergency flares, and a pickaxe from my ranger station. I also brought something I'd never carried before in 13 years of ranger work: my father's old hunting rifle. The hike up to Copperhead Ridge felt different this time. The forest was still too quiet, but now I noticed other things that were wrong. Dead animals everywhere, arranged in perfect circles. Snakes that had died with their mouths open, as if they'd been screaming. Trees that looked healthy from a distance but were completely hollow up close. When I reached the cave entrance, I found fresh tire tracks in the mud. Someone else had been here recently, probably within the last few hours. I checked the rifle one more time, made sure it was loaded, and entered the cave. The bone chamber had grown again. What had been a single room was now a complex of connected chambers, all of them filled with human remains arranged in impossible architectural patterns. Bone bridges spanning empty space, skull arches that should have collapsed under their own weight, walls that curved in directions that hurt to look at. And in the center of it all, I found them. The Hendricks family. 3 generations of them, from elderly grandparents down to children who couldn't have been older than 10. They were kneeling in a circle around an altar made of human spines, and they were eating. Each family member held a human bone in their hands: arm bones, leg bones, pieces of skull and rib cage. They were gnawing on them like corn on the cob, their faces covered in something dark and wet. When they saw me, they didn't stop eating. They just smiled and kept chewing. "Ruth Hawthorne," said the oldest man, his voice muffled by the bone in his mouth. "We've been waiting for you. Your great-grandmother's bones have been calling your name." That's when I saw the altar clearly. It was built from bones I recognized. My great-grandmother had been buried in the old cemetery near town. But there, twisted into the spine of the altar, was her wedding ring, the one my mother had described to me 100 times. "We dug her up last month," the man continued. "Such sweet bones, such interesting sins to taste. Did you know she killed a man in 1923? Shot him dead for trying to steal her chickens. That sin tastes like copper and guilt." I raised the rifle, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't aim properly. "You can't stop us," said a woman who might have been and his daughter. Half of her face was missing, replaced by smooth bone. "We've been growing stronger for over a century. Every bone we eat, every sin we consume, makes us more than human." "Where's Dr. Mills?" I demanded. She pointed to the altar. "He's part of the congregation now. His bones hold such wonderful knowledge about the dead. We learn something new every time we taste them." That's when the preacher appeared behind me, the same half-skeleton man I'd encountered before. But now he looked even less human. Bone had spread across most of his body, leaving only patches of flesh around his remaining eye and mouth. "Ruth," he said gently, "you don't have to be afraid. Death is not the end. Join us, and you'll live forever. All you have to do is taste the bones of the dead and accept their sins as your own." I could see it then, the temptation they offered. Never growing old, never dying, never having to face the darkness that comes after life. All I had to do was eat human flesh and become something that wasn't entirely human anymore. Instead, I shot him. The bullet passed right through his chest without effect. He looked down at the hole in his suit, then back at me. "Bullets can't hurt us, sister. We're beyond such physical concerns now." But I wasn't aiming to hurt him. I was aiming at the ceiling above the altar. The second shot brought down a shower of limestone. The third shot cracked one of the main support pillars. By the fourth shot, I could hear the mountain groaning above us. "What are you doing?" screamed the Hendricks woman. "What I should have done a week ago," I said, and fired the fifth shot. The ceiling came down all at once. Tons of rock and limestone crashed into the chamber, crushing the altar and scattering bones in every direction. The Hendricks family shrieked as the cave-in separated them from their collected remains. I ran for the entrance, as fast as I could move. Behind me, I could hear inhuman screaming and the sound of bones snapping. The entire mountain seemed to be collapsing in on itself. I made it out just as the Salma entrance caved in. A wall of rock and debris sealed the tunnel completely, trapping everything inside. I sat in the rain for an hour, watching the sealed cave entrance and listening for any sound from inside. There was nothing but silence. When I finally hiked back down to the parking area, I found Dr. Mills sitting in his station wagon. He looked exactly the same as he had a week earlier, before he'd entered the cave. Same clothes, same equipment, same excited expression. But when he spoke, his voice sounded hollow, like an echo of an echo. "Ruth, there you are. I was wondering where you'd gotten to. Are you ready to go explore that burial site?" I stared at him for a long moment. "Jim, what do you remember about the past week?" He looked confused. "What do you mean? I just got here this morning. We're supposed to investigate that illegal excavation together, remember?" I realized then that whatever had happened to Jim in the cave, whatever the preacher and the Hendricks family had done to him, it had left only a shell behind. A ghost of a man, doomed to repeat the same day over and over. I told him the site had been compromised and we needed to come back later with more equipment. He agreed reluctantly and drove away. I watched his taillights disappear down the mountain road, knowing I would probably see him again next week, with no memory of our conversation. That was 6 months ago. I filed my official report, declaring the Copperhead Ridge cave system geologically unstable and permanently closed to the public. The state has accepted my recommendation and posted warning signs throughout the area, but I know it's not over. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about the Bone Church. In my dreams, it's still growing, still adding new rooms and chambers deep underground. I dream about the Hendricks family, trapped but not dead, slowly rebuilding their congregation frau and the crushed remains of their altar. And sometimes, when I'm working alone in other cave systems throughout the forest, I find things that shouldn't be there. A single human skull, perfectly clean and white, sitting in the middle of an unexplored chamber. Bones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. The sound of distant singing echoing through limestone tunnels. I've started keeping a list of other caves that might be connected to the Bone Church. There are 17 of them so far, scattered throughout eastern Kentucky and into West Virginia, all of them in remote areas where people disappear and are never found. I think the Eternal Congregation was bigger than just the Hendricks family. I think they had communities throughout the Appalachian Mountains, all of them connected by underground cave systems. And I think I only collapsed one small part of something much larger. Next month, I'm planning to explore a cave system near Mammoth Cave National Park. Local stories say it's haunted by the ghosts of Civil War soldiers, but I suspect it might be something worse than ghosts. I'll be taking more than a rifle this time. If you're reading this and you work in any kind of cave rescue or archaeological capacity in Kentucky, West Virginia, or Tennessee, please be careful. If you find bones arranged in unnatural patterns, if you hear singing in empty caves, if you meet anyone who claims to be part of the Eternal Congregation, get out immediately and contact me through the Daniel Boone National Forest Ranger Station. Don't try to investigate alone. Don't trust anyone who tells you that death is just a transformation, and whatever you do, don't taste the bones of the dead. Some hungers, once awakened, can never be satisfied. My name is Ruth Hawthorne, and I've been guarding these mountains for 13 years. I thought I was protecting the living from the dangers of the wilderness. Now I know I'm protecting them from something much worse, the dead who refuse to stay buried. My name is Caleb Ironwood, and I've been studying these Tennessee mountain forests for 21 years. I know every tree, every bush, every weed that grows on Blackberry Mountain. At least I thought I did until last August. People think being a forest ranger means sitting in a watchtower all day or telling tourists not to feed the bears. But I'm what they call a forest health specialist. I study plant diseases, track invasive species, and make sure our woods stay healthy. I've got a master's degree in forestry and 15 years of published research on Appalachian plants. I can identify poison ivy from 50 feet away and tell you which mushrooms will kill you just by smell. The Cherokee have stories about Blackberry Mountain, old tales about hungry earth that eats everything alive. They say the mountain gets restless sometimes and needs to feed. I never paid much attention to those stories. I'm a scientist. I believe in facts, not fairy tales. But that drought summer changed everything. It started with a call from park headquarters on August 23, 1986. A family camping near the old Morrison Trail had missed their check-in time. The Morrisons, dad, mom, 2 kids, were experienced hikers. They knew these woods almost as well as I did. I found their campsite around noon. At first glance, everything looked normal. Tent still standing, food properly stored in bare canisters, fire pit cold but neat. But something felt wrong. The air was too quiet. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow. Then I noticed the plants. Blackberry vines had grown around their tent in perfect straight lines, like someone had planted them on purpose. The thorns were huge, bigger than I'd ever seen. Some were thick as pencils and sharp as needles. When I touched one, it felt warm. I called out for the Morrisons, but my voice just died in the thick air. That is when I saw the first drag marks leading away from the camp. Not animal tracks. These were long, smooth grooves in the dirt, like something heavy had been pulled through the forest. I followed the marks deeper into the woods. The blackberry vines grew thicker as I walked, forming walls on both sides of what used to be a hiking trail. The thorns seemed to lean toward me as I passed. Probably just my imagination, but it made my skin crawl. The drag marks led to a clearing I'd never seen before, even after all my years on this mountain. In the center sat a huge mound of earth covered in the strangest plants I'd ever encountered. Vines twisted together in spiral patterns. Flowers bloomed in colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Deep purples that hurt to look at, yellows that seemed to glow. And there, half buried in the mound, I saw Tom Morrison's hiking boot. My hands shook as I radioed for backup. "This is Ranger Ironwood at Blackberry Mountain. I need a search and rescue team at coordinates." But static filled the radio. No matter how I adjusted the antenna, I couldn't get through. I tried to dig around the boot, but the earth felt warm and soft, like fresh bread dough. My fingers sank deep into the soil, and I swear I felt something moving underneath, something that pulsed like a heartbeat. That's when I heard the screaming. It came from somewhere below me, muffled by dirt and roots, a child's voice crying for help. I dropped to my knees and dug faster, following the sound. The soil seemed to push back against my hands, but I kept digging. "Help me!" The voice was clearer now. It was Katie Morrison, the 8-year-old daughter. "Please, someone help!" I dug until my fingernails broke and bled. Finally, my hand touched something solid. Katie's arm, still warm. I grabbed it and pulled as hard as I could. She came up slow, covered in dark mud that smelled like rotting leaves. But she was alive, breathing. Her eyes were wide with terror, and strange green marks covered her skin like tiny vines. "The plants," she whispered. "They're eating us." I carried Katie out of that clearing as fast as I could. She weighed almost nothing, like the mountain had already started digesting her from the inside. The green marks on her skin seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. "Where are your parents?" I asked as we walked. "Where's your brother?" Katie's eyes rolled back, showing only white. "They went deeper," she said in a voice that didn't sound like her own. "They went to feed the roots." My truck was parked 2 miles away. Katie didn't speak again during the hike, but I could hear her breathing getting weaker. The green marks were spreading up her arms like ivy climbing a wall. I radioed the hospital from my truck. This is Ranger Ironwood. I have an 8-year-old girl, possible plant poisoning, need immediate medical attention. Plant poisoning? The dispatcher sounded confused. Just have Dr. Reed meet me at the emergency room, now. Dr. Sarah Reed was the only person I knew who might believe what I'd seen. She studied plant toxins at the university and had helped me identify poisonous species before. If anyone could help Katie, it was her. But during the 40-minute drive to town, something horrible happened. Katie started to change. The green marks weren't just on her skin anymore. They were growing inside her. I could see thin vines moving under her flesh like worms. Her fingernails turned dark brown like bark. When she breathed, her chest made a rustling sound like wind through leaves. "They're still in me," she whispered. "The roots, they're growing." By the time we reached the hospital, Katie Morrison was more plant than human. Dr. Reed took one look at her and went pale. "What happened to this child?" "I found her buried in the forest. Something's infected her with, I don't know what to call it, some kind of parasitic plant." "That's impossible, Caleb. Plants don't work that way." But as we watched, a SMA L branch pushed through the skin on Katie's forehead. Tiny leaves unfurled like a time-lapse movie. She smiled up at us with teeth that had turned green. "The mountain is hungry," she said in that strange, not her voice. "It's been sleeping for so long. Now it's time to feed." Then Katie Morrison died. Or maybe she just stopped being Katie. Her body went still, but the plants inside her kept growing. Roots burst from her fingers and dug into the hospital bed. Vines wrapped around the bed rails. In minutes, her body disappeared under a tangle of angry green growth. Dr. Reed grabbed my arm. "We need to burn it, now. We can't burn a child's body. That's not a child anymore, Caleb. Look!" The plant mass that used to be Katie was moving toward us. Vines stretched across the floor like reaching fingers. Thorns clicked against the tile like claws. We ran. Behind us, I heard the sound of breaking glass and screaming nurses. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. In the parking lot, Dr. Reed grabbed my shoulders. "Tell me exactly what you saw up there." I told her everything. The strange clearing, the warm soil, the sounds of the other family members still buried somewhere under that mound. "I have to go back," I said. "The Morrisons are still alive. I heard them." "Caleb, think about what you're saying. If plants can do that to a human being, then I need to stop it before it spreads." Dr. Reed stared at me for a long moment. "I'm coming with you." "Sarah, you saw what happened to Katie." "Which is exactly why I need to come. Someone has to study this thing, figure out how it works, how to kill it." We loaded her truck with every chemical she had in her lab. Herbicides, pesticides, anything that might hurt plants. We also brought gasoline and matches. If we couldn't poison it, maybe we could burn it. The drive back to Blackberry Mountain took forever. The sun was setting. By the time we reached the trailhead, the forest looked different in the dim light, darker, more alive. "Stay close," I told Sarah as we hiked toward the clearing. "And whatever you do, don't touch any plants." But as we walked, I realized that might be impossible. The blackberry vines had grown since that morning. They now covered the entire trail, forming a tunnel of thorns above our heads. We had to crawl through spaces barely wide enough for our bodies. The thorns were warm to the touch, and I swear they moved when we got close, leaning in to scratch our skin. "Caleb," Sarah whispered behind me, "look at your hands." I looked down. Where the thorns had scratched me, tiny green lines were appearing on my skin, just like Katie. "We're running out of time," I said. That's when we heard Tom Morrison screaming somewhere ahead of us in the darkness. The screaming led us to a part of the forest I'd never seen before, even after 21 years on this mountain. The trees here were massive, older than anything that should exist in Tennessee. Their trunks were wider than houses, and their roots pushed up through the ground like giant snakes. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. "These trees would take 500 years to grow this big." The green marks on my hands were spreading. I could feel something moving under my skin, like tiny worms crawling through my blood. Sarah had scratches too, and her eyes were starting to look glassy. Tom Morrison's screaming got louder as we moved deeper into the ancient grove. But it wasn't coming from ahead of us anymore. It was coming from below. They're underground, I realized. The whole family is buried somewhere under our feet. Sarah knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. I can hear them, she said. All three of them. They're still alive, but... Caleb, I think they're being digested. Slowly. The forest floor felt soft and spongy, like walking on a giant's stomach. With each step, I could feel movement beneath us. Roots shifting, earth pulsing, something huge breathing in the depths. We need to dig them. Out, I said. With what? We didn't bring shovels. I looked around and spotted a dead branch. But when I picked it up, the wood crumbled in my hands like it was rotting from the inside. Everything here was being eaten by something. That's when we saw the first root. It pushed up through the ground near Sarah's feet, thick as a tree trunk, covered in thorns the size of kitchen knives. The root moved like a snake, weaving back and forth in the air, searching for something. Don't move, I whispered. But it was too late. The root had caught our scent. It turned toward us and made a sound like a cat hissing. Other roots started pushing up through the ground all around us, dozens of them, all reaching in our direction. Run! We crashed through the undergrowth as the roots chased us. They moved faster than anything that size should move, crashing through trees and tearing up the earth behind us. I could hear them getting closer. Sarah tripped and fell. A root as thick as my waist shot toward her face. Without thinking, I pulled out my pocket knife and slashed at it. The blade cut deep, and dark red sap poured out like blood. The root pulled back with a shriek that sounded almost human. It's bleeding, Sarah gasped. Plants don't bleed. More roots surrounded us, but they kept their distance now. They'd learned that we could hurt them. The chemicals, I said. Try the herbicide. Sarah pulled a spray bottle from her pack and aimed it at the nearest root. The chemical hit its surface and started smoking. The root writhed in pain and retreated underground. It works, she said, but we don't have enough to fight them all. That's when I saw him. Tom Morrison stepped out from behind one of the giant trees. At first I felt relief. We'd found him alive. But as he got closer, I realized something was terribly wrong. His skin had turned bark brown. Branches grew from his shoulders, boulders like arms. His eyes were gone, replaced by empty holes filled with writhing vines. When he opened his mouth to speak, flower petals fell out instead of words. He's been infected, Sarah whispered. Completely taken over. Tom Thing walked toward us with jerky movements like a puppet on strings. Other shapes moved in the shadows behind him. His wife Linda and their 10-year-old son Jake, both transformed into walking plant creatures. They're not dead, I realized. They're still conscious in there, still aware. I could see the human fear in their movements, even though their bodies were no longer human. Whatever had infected them was keeping them alive, while it slowly changed them into something else. Help us, Tom Thing whispered through his flower petal mouth. Please, kill us. Sarah raised the spray bottle, but I grabbed her arm. Wait. Caleb, we have to destroy them before they spread this to others. There has to be another way. But even as I said it, I knew she was right. The infection was getting worse by the hour. The green marks on my hands had spread to my arms. I could feel roots starting to grow in my chest, wrapping around my heart. Tom Thing came closer. Up close, I could see movement under his bark skin. Something was living inside him, controlling him like a puppet. His human eyes were still there, buried deep behind the vine-filled sockets, begging for death. The source, he managed to whisper. Find the mother. Kill her. Only way. What mother? I asked. But Tom Thing couldn't speak anymore. Vines had grown over his mouth, sealing it shut. He pointed deeper into the forest, toward a darkness so thick it seemed solid. We have to go there, Sarah said. Whatever's controlling this, that's where we'll find it. The Morrison family followed us as we walked deeper into the ancient grove, their wooden feet crunching on the carpet of dead leaves. They couldn't speak, but I could feel them trying to help us, fighting against whatever was controlling their bodies. The darkness ahead wasn't natural. It moved and wreathed like a living thing. And from somewhere inside it came a sound like the world's largest heartbeat. "That's where it lives," I said. "The thing that's doing this to them." Sarah checked her remaining chemicals. "I've got maybe 3 more minutes of herbicide. After that..." "We burn it," I said. "We burn the whole damn mountain if we have to." But as we stepped into the darkness, I realized we might not get the chance. The thing waiting for us in there was older than the mountain, older than the Cherokee legends, older than anything that should exist in our world. And it was very, very hungry. The darkness swallowed us completely. Even with our flashlights, we could barely see 3 feet ahead. The air was thick and warm, like being inside something's mouth. "Stay close," I whispered to Sarah. But when I reached for her hand, my fingers touched bark instead of skin. The infection was spreading faster now. I was running out of time. The heartbeat sound got louder as we walked. It echoed off invisible walls, making the whole space pulse like we were inside a giant chest. The ground beneath us felt soft and wet, covered in something that squished between our boots. Then our flashlights hit it, and I wished they hadn't. The mother was huge, bigger than a house, bigger than anything alive had a right to be. It looked like a mushroom crossed with a spider, crossed with something from a nightmare. Thick, white stalks stretched in all directions like legs, disappearing into the darkness. The main body pulsed with veins full of glowing green fluid. And all around it, stuck to the walls like decorations, were bodies. Hundreds of them. People who had gone missing in these mountains over the years. Hikers, campers, hunters. All of them half digested, half transformed into plant matter, but still alive, still aware. Their eyes followed us as we approached. Some tried to spout, ache, but only managed wet, gurgling sounds. Others had been there so long that flowers bloomed from their mouths and vines grew from their eye sockets. "My God," Sarah whispered, "how long has this been going on?" The mother turned toward us. Not its whole body, but something that might have been a head. It was covered in eyes, hundreds of them, all different sizes and colors. Human eyes. The eyes of everyone it had consumed over the decades. When it spoke, the voice came from all the trapped people at once, their mouths moving in perfect sync. "Welcome," they all said together. "We've been waiting for you, Caleb Ironwood." "Let them go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let them go." The mother laughed through a dozen different throats. "They are me now. I am them. We are all one organism, one purpose, one hunger. What do you want? To feed, to grow, to spread beyond this mountain to every forest, every garden, every place where green things grow. Humanity has forgotten that you are not the masters of this world. You are food." Sarah raised her spray bottle, but roots shot up from the ground and wrapped around her arms. The herbicide spilled uselessly onto the floor. "You cannot poison us," the mother said. "We have learned from every chemical you've used, adapted, evolved. Soon we will be immune to fire as well." More roots emerged from the walls and floor, reaching for us. I pulled out my knife, but it felt pathetic against something so massive. That's when Tom Morrison saved us. The plant-infected man stepped between us and the reaching roots. His bark-covered body was stronger than it looked. He grabbed the roots and tore them apart with his wooden hands. Behind him, his wife Linda and son Jake joined the fight, their transformed bodies attacking the mother's extensions. "Now!" Tom Thing shouted through his flower-petal mouth. "Kill it now!" "How?" I yelled back. Sarah pointed at the mother's center, where all the veins of green fluid converged. "The heart! Cut the heart!" I ran toward the pulsing center while the Morrison family held day off the roots. The mother's hundreds of eyes focused on me, and I felt its rage like a physical force. The trapped people on the walls screamed in unison as I got closer. But the infection inside me was getting stronger. I could feel my legs getting stiff and wooden. My vision was turning green around the edges. In minutes, I'd be just another puppet for this thing to control. I reached the mother's heart just as my knife hand started to transform. Bark covered my fingers, but I still had enough human strength left to drive the blade deep into the pulsing center. Green blood exploded everywhere. The mother shrieked through every mouth in the cavern. The trapped people on the walls began to dissolve, their bodies finally released from years of torment. But the mother wasn't dead yet. It lashed out with every root and vine it had, trying to crush me before the poison in my system could finish its work. I felt my ribs crack as a root thick as a telephone pole wrapped around my chest. That's when Sarah threw the gasoline. She'd somehow gotten free during the chaos and doused the mother's heart with the fuel we'd brought. "Caleb, get back!" I couldn't move. The roots held me too tight, but I still had my matches. "Sarah, run!" I struck the match just as the mother's grip tightened enough to crack my spine. The flames rushed up my arms and spread across the creature's heart. The screaming got so loud that blood ran from my ears. The fire spread faster than I thought possible. In seconds, the entire cavern was an inferno. The trapped people burned away like old paper, finally free. The Morrison family stood in the flames like torches, their faces peaceful at last. And I burned too, feeling the plant infection in my body die in the heat. Somehow I made it outside. Maybe Sarah dragged me, maybe I crawled. I don't remember much after lighting that match except the sound of the mountain screaming as everything burned. The fire burned for 3 days. When it was over, half of Blackberry Mountain was just charred stumps and ash. The official report blamed it on the drought and a lightning strike. Nobody asked too many questions about why a forest ranger and a university professor were found unconscious near the fire's starting point. They treated us for smoke inhalation and released us after a week in the hospital. The green marks on my skin faded, but I could still feel where they'd been. Thin lines of scar tissue that ache when it rains. Sarah quit her job at the university. Last I heard, she was working at a flower shop in Florida, as far from forests as she could get. She never talks to me anymore. I think seeing what plants can really do broke something inside her. I went back to work after a month, but everything had changed. The mountain felt different now, cleaner but also emptier, like something ancient and important had been lost in the fire. The Cherokee elders I talked to afterward just nodded when I told them what really happened. They'd known all along that something evil lived up there. "The hungry earth sleeps again," one old man told me. "But not forever. It never sleeps forever." He was right to worry. 3 months later, I got reports of strange plant behavior in the Smoky Mountains. Vines growing in geometric patterns, thorns containing paralytic toxins, hikers going missing near areas of unusually aggressive vegetation. Different mountain, same signs. I requested a transfer to desk work in the city. Let someone else deal with the forests now. I've seen what lives in the deep woods, the ancient places where humans aren't supposed to go. I've seen what happens when we forget that we're guests in nature's house, not the owners. But even here in Nashville, surrounded by concrete and steel, I can't escape what I learned on Blackberry Mountain. Every houseplant seems to watch me. Every tree outside my apartment window whispers things I don't want to hear. When I close my eyes, I still see those hundreds of huma, and faces trapped in the mother's body, still hear their voices begging for death. Sometimes I wonder if we really killed it, or if we just made it angry. Sometimes I think about all the other mountains in Appalachia, all the other forests where old things might be sleeping, waiting, getting hungry. The Cherokee were right about one thing. The earth does get hungry sometimes. And when it does, it remembers that humans are just meat that walks around on top of the soil. So here's my advice. Stay out of the deep woods, especially the old-growth forests where the trees are bigger than they should be and the ground feels too soft under your feet. If you see plants growing in perfect patterns, or thorns that seem to follow your movement, or soil that feels warm to the touch, run. Don't try to study it. Don't try to understand it. Just run, and don't look back. Because the hungry earth is always listening, always waiting, and it never forgets the taste of human blood. My name is Caleb Ironwood, And I used to love the forest. Now I know better. Now I know the forest loves me back. My name is Solomon Ashcraft, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 20 years. I've seen hikers get lost, bears get too close to campers, and more broken bones than I can count. But I've never seen anything that made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. Not until October of 1993. I'm not the kind of man who believes in ghost stories. I have a degree in Appalachian history. I've worked with the Cherokee Nation to preserve sacred sites. I know the difference between legend and fact, or at least, I thought I did. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. A wedding party had gone missing near Sorrow's Peak. 5 people, the bride, groom, and 3 family members. They had permits for a sunrise ceremony at the old overlook. Beautiful spot, but isolated. Takes 2 hours of steep hiking just to get there. They were supposed to check in by noon yesterday, dispatch told me over the radio. Family's getting worried. Sorrow's Peak got its name from the Cherokee. Long story short, back in 1838 during the removal, a young Cherokee woman named White Deer jumped from those cliffs rather than leave her homeland. The Cherokee remember her as a bride who died of a broken heart. Sad story, but that's all I ever thought it was, just a story. I grabbed my gear and headed up the mountain. October fog was thick that morning, thicker than usual. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees overnight, which was strange for the season. Even stranger, the fog seemed to hang around Sorrow's Peak like it was stuck there. The hike up was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my boots on wet leaves and my own breathing. I'd walked this trail hundreds of times, but something felt different, wrong. About halfway up, I found their first campsite. Tent was still there, perfectly set up. Coffee pot still warm. But no people. Their wedding dress was hanging from a tree branch, clean and white like someone had just pressed it, but it was swaying in the wind even though there was no wind. I called out their names. Hello? Park Service? Anyone here? Nothing. Just my voice echoing off the rocks. I kept climbing. The fog got thicker with each step. My radio started crackling with static. Then it went dead completely. That should have been my first real warning. When I reached Sorrow's Peak, I saw them. All 5 members of the wedding party were sitting in a perfect circle around the overlook. They weren't moving, weren't talking, just sitting there, staring down at the valley below with their mouths open like they were screaming, but no sound was coming out. I ran over to them. Hey, are you okay? The bride turned to look at me. Her eyes were completely white. No pupils, no color, just white. She opened her mouth, and I heard something that still gives me nightmares. The sound of a woman crying, but it wasn't coming from her throat. It was coming from the rocks beneath us. That's when I noticed they were all wearing black, every single one of them. But I'd seen their permits. This was supposed to be a wedding, not a funeral. The groom reached out and grabbed my arm. His skin was ice cold. She's so sad, he whispered. She's been waiting so long for someone to understand. Then he pointed toward the cliff edge. There, standing right at the spot where White Deer had jumped over 150 years ago, was a woman in white. She was beautiful, with long black hair and traditional Cherokee dress, but she was crying tears that looked like blood, and I could see right through her to the valley beyond. That's when I started running. I made it about 50 yards down the trail before I had to stop. My legs were shaking so bad I couldn't keep going. I told myself it was just the altitude, the fog, maybe carbon monoxide poisoning from their camping stove. There had to be a logical explanation. I sat on a fallen log and tried to think like a ranger. 5 people suffering from some kind of group hallucination. Maybe they'd eaten something bad or there was a gas leak from underground. I'd seen stranger things in my 20 years on the job, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen on that cliff. After I caught my breath, I hiked back down to base camp and called for backup. My supervisor, Maria Santos, was also our park historian. If anyone could help me figure out what was happening to these people, it would be her. Maria arrived 2 hours later with a medical team. She was a small woman, but tough as nails. She'd grown up in these mountains and knew more Cherokee history than anyone I'd ever met. "Tell me exactly what you saw," she said as we hiked back up the mountain. I described the wedding party, their strange behavior, the woman in white. Maria listened without interrupting, but I could see her face getting paler with each detail. "Solomon," she said when I finished, "do you remember the exact date White Deer died?" I thought about it. October 15th, 1838. Why? Maria stopped walking. "What's today's date?" My blood went cold. October 15th. 155 years to the day. The fog was even thicker when we reached Sorrow's Peak the second time. The medical team spread out to check on the wedding party while Maria and I looked around the site. The 5 people were exactly where I'd left them, still sitting in their circle, still staring, still dressed in black. But now there were flowers around them, not wedding flowers, but funeral flowers, white lilies and dark roses arranged like someone was preparing for a burial. "Nobody brought those flowers up here," I told Maria. "They weren't here this morning." One of the paramedics was trying to get a response from the bride. She wasn't fighting him, but she wasn't helping either, just staring with those white, empty eyes. "Her body temperature is 89 degrees, he called out. "She's hypothermic, but she's not shivering. None of them are." That's when Maria noticed something else. "Solomon, look at their hands." All 5 members of the wedding party were wearing rings, but they weren't wedding rings. They were mourning rings, black bands worn to remember the dead. And somehow I knew without asking that they hadn't been wearing those rings when they came up the mountain. "We need to get them down to the hospital," the paramedic said. But when we tried to lift the bride, she started screaming, not a human scream. It sounded like the wind howling through empty caves. The sound was so awful that 2 of the paramedics had to cover their ears, and that's when we all saw her. The woman in white was standing right behind us. She was even more beautiful up close, but also more terrible. Her face was perfect except for her eyes, which were completely black, and the tears of blood that ran down her cheeks. She was looking directly at the wedding party, and her mouth was moving like she was singing. But the song that came out wasn't in English. It was Cherokee, and it sounded like a lullaby mixed with a funeral dirge. One of the paramedics fainted. Another one ran down the mountain, and we never saw him again. The woman in white raised her hand and pointed at Maria. When she did, Maria's eyes went wide and she started walking toward the cliff edge. "Maria, stop!" I yelled. But Maria kept walking. She stepped right off the edge of the cliff. But instead of falling, she kept walking on empty air, following the woman in white down toward the valley below. I ran to the edge and looked down. Maria was about 30 feet below me, still walking on nothing, and she was starting to change. Her park ranger uniform was turning into a white dress. Her hair was growing longer, and she was crying tears that looked like blood. That's when I understood. The woman in white wasn't just a GH, Ost. She was collecting people, making them like her. And Maria was about to become another mourning bride of Sorrow's Peak. I did the only thing I could think of. I jumped. Falling through, mountain air should have killed me, but it didn't. About 10 feet down, I felt something catch me. Not hands, but something soft and cold like fog. I was floating, just like Maria. The woman in white turned to look at me. This close, I could see that she wasn't just crying tears of blood. She was crying tears of time. Each drop that fell showed me a different moment from her life. Her wedding day, the soldiers coming, the long walk west, the moment she decided she couldn't leave her homeland. "White Deer," I said, remembering her name from the Cherokee stories. She nodded, and when she spoke, her voice came from everywhere at once. The rocks, the trees, the very air around us. "I have been waiting," she said. "Waiting for someone to understand the pain of being torn from the one you love." Maria was still walking deeper into the valley, but she was moving slower now. The change was taking hold of her, Her skin was getting paler, more transparent. "Let her go," I said. "She didn't do anything to you." White Deer shook her head. "She came to my sacred place on the day of my death. She brought witnesses to a wedding when this is a place of mourning. Now she will learn what it means to lose everything." I looked back up at the cliff. The wedding party was still sitting there, but they were changing too. The bride's white dress was turning black. The groom's tuxedo was becoming funeral clothes. They were all aging rapidly, their hair turning white, their faces becoming hollow. "They're innocent people," I said. "So was I," White Deer replied. "I was 19 years old. I had just married the man I loved. We were going to have children, grow old together in these mountains. But the soldiers came and said we had to leave. They said our land belonged to someone else now." The pain in her voice was awful. It wasn't just sadness. It was the kind of grief that breaks a person's mind. "My husband tried to fight them," she continued. "They shot him in front of me. Then they said I still had to walk west, that I had to leave his body behind for the animals." I felt tears running down my own face. The Cherokee removal was the darkest chapter in these mountains' history. I'd studied it, written about it, but I'd never felt it like this. "So I came here," White Deer said, "to this high place where I could see all the land we were losing. And I jumped, because a broken heart can only take so much." She raised her hand, and suddenly I was experiencing her memories like they were my own. The soldiers' faces, the sound of the gunshot, the feeling of choosing death over a life without love. But then I saw something else. My own ancestor's face among the soldiers. My great-great-grandfather, Solomon Ashcraft Sr., had been part of the Georgia Guard that enforced the removal. "You carry his name," White Deer said, reading my thoughts. "You carry his blood. Your family helped destroy mine." That's when I understood why she'd let me float instead of fall. This wasn't random. She'd been waiting for me specifically, waiting 155 years for a descendant of the man who'd helped kill her husband to come to her sacred place. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours." White Deer looked surprised, like she hadn't expected me to apologize. "Sorry doesn't bring back the dead," she said. Maria was almost gone now, more ghost than human. And up on the cliff, I could hear the wedding party starting to sing the same mourning song White Deer had been singing. Their voices were getting weaker, like they were fading away. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want them to understand," White Deer said. "All the happy couples who come to my sacred place, they think love is easy, but they don't know what it means to have it torn away. I want them to feel what I felt. The pain of separation, the grief of loss." She gestured toward Maria. "Your friend will help me teach them. She will become another mourning bride, and together we will make sure no one forgets the price of forced separation." I looked at Maria, then back at White Deer. An idea was forming in my mind, a desperate, probably stupid idea. "What if there was another way?" I said. "What if instead of making people suffer, you helped them understand? What if you could find peace?" White Deer's black eyes narrowed. "There is no peace for the dead who died from broken hearts." "There could be," I said. "In Cherokee tradition, there are ceremonies for helping spirits find rest. I've studied them. I know how they work." It was a long shot, but I had to try. I started reciting the Cherokee prayers I'd learned during my cultural preservation work. Words for healing, for letting go, for finding peace in the next world. White Deer listened, and for a moment, her expression softened. But then she shook her head. "Those ceremonies require the living to make amends for the wrongs of the past. What amends can you make for genocide? What payment can balance the scales of murder?" She had a point. How do you make up for something that terrible? But then I remembered something else from Cherokee tradition. Something about taking responsibility not just for your own actions, but for the actions of your ancestors. "Let me take their place," I said. White Deer stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "You would take their place?" she asked. I nodded toward Maria, who was almost completely transparent now, and then up at the wedding party on the cliff. Let them go. Let them live their lives. Take me instead. You don't understand what you're offering, White Deer said. To take their place means to feel all the pain I have felt for 155 years. The loneliness, the grief, the anger. It never stops. It never gets better. I thought about that. An eternity of that kind of pain. But then I looked at Maria floating beside me, at the innocent people up on the sea, Liff, who just wanted to get married in a beautiful place. I understand, I said. My ancestor helped cause your pain. Let me help end it. White Deer was quiet for a long time. Around us, the mountain itself seemed to be holding its breath. There is another way, she finally said. But it is harder than simply taking their place. Tell me. You must help me remember not just the pain, but also the love. The Cherokee have a ceremony called the Nightland Eagle Dance. It helps spirits remember what they lived for, not just what they died from. But it requires two people, one to guide the spirit and one to anchor them to the world of the living. I nodded. Maria can anchor us, and I'll guide you through the memories. If you fail, White Deer warned, all of us will be trapped here forever. The wedding party, your friend, you, and me. We will all become mourning spirits. It was a huge risk, but it was the only chance we had. How do we start? I asked. White Deer closed her eyes and began to sing. This time, the song wasn't a lament. It was something older, deeper. A song that called spirits home. I felt the pull immediately. My consciousness was being drawn into hers, into her memories. But this time, I wasn't just experiencing her pain. I was experiencing her whole life. I saw her as a child, playing by the same streams I protected as a ranger. I saw her learning traditional crafts from her grandmother. I saw her meeting the young man she would marry, their courtship, their wedding ceremony. The memories were beautiful, full of love and laughter. But they made the later memories even more painful by contrast. Then came the soldiers, the forced removal, the murder of her husband, the choice to jump rather than be separated from her homeland. But as we moved through the memories together, I started to show her something else. I showed her how the Cherokee had survived, how they'd maintained their culture despite everything, how sacred sites like Sorrow's Peak were now protected. Your sacrifice wasn't meaningless, I told her as we danced through time and memory. People remember, they learn, they try to do better. White Deer began to change. The tears of blood stopped flowing. Her black eyes started to clear. For the first time in 155 years, she was remembering what she had lived for, not just what she had died from. My grandmother told me that love is stronger than death, she whispered. I forgot that. I let grief become stronger than love. Around us, the mountain was changing too. The unnatural fog was lifting. The temperature was returning to normal. Up on the cliff, I could see the wedding party beginning to move, beginning to look around in confusion. Maria was becoming solid again, her park ranger uniform returning to normal. But White Deer was becoming more transparent. I can feel them calling me, she said, looking toward the east. My husband, my family, all those who went before, they're waiting for me in the Nightland. Are you ready to go? I asked. She nodded, and for the first time she smiled. It was beautiful and sad at the same time. Thank you, she said, for helping me remember that I was more than just my death. She looked toward the wedding party one last time. Let them marry here if they wish, she said. This can be a place of love again, not just mourning. Then she began to fade, but as she disappeared, she left something behind. A feeling of peace that settled over the whole mountain like a gentle blanket. Maria and I found ourselves standing on solid ground again at the base of the cliff. Above us, the wedding party was looking around in confusion, but they were alive, alert, and back to normal. What happened? The bride called down. We remember coming up here, but then everything went black. I looked at Maria. She was pale, but okay. Gas leak, I called back. We need to get you all checked out at the hospital. The wedding party was fine, physically anyway. They all had mild hypothermia and some memory loss, but nothing permanent. The hospital released them after overnight observation. They didn't remember white deer. They didn't remember the supernatural events. As far as they knew, they'd been overcome by some kind of natural gas leak, and we'd rescued them. Maybe that was better. But Maria and I remembered everything. Do you think she found peace? Maria asked me a week later as we sat in the ranger station, filling out our reports. I thought about the smile on White Deer's face as she faded away. Yeah, I said. I think she did. We wrote up the incident as a gas leak investigation, recommended that the area around Sorrow's Peak be tested for natural gas deposits, suggested improved warning signs for campers. But privately, I started doing more research into Cherokee history. I reached out to tribal elders, learned more about the traditional ceremonies for helping spirits find rest. Started working on a project to create a proper memorial for white deer and all the others who died during the removal, because I understood now that the dead deserve more than just to be forgotten. They deserve to be remembered for who they were, not just how they died. The wedding party sent us a thank you card a month later. They'd gotten married in a small ceremony back home, but they wanted to return to Sorrow's Peak for their first anniversary. It's such a beautiful place, the bride wrote, so peaceful and full of love. Maria and I exchanged looks when we read that. Should we warn them? Maria asked. No, I said. White Deer is at peace now. She said this could be a place of love again. But I still recommend that couples who want to get married at Sorrow's Peak do their research first, learn the history, understand what happened there, show respect for those who came before, because the mountains remember everything. And sometimes, if you're not careful, the past can reach out and pull you in. I still patrol Sorrow's Peak regularly. It's different now, lighter somehow, more welcoming. But on quiet mornings, when the fog rolls in, I sometimes hear Cherokee songs carried on the wind. Not mourning songs, but celebration songs, wedding songs. I think White Deer is still watching over her sacred place. But now she's protecting love instead of punishing it. And maybe that's how it should be. My name is Solomon Ashcraft, and I've been a park ranger for 23 years now. I've seen a lot of things in these mountains. Most of them I can explain. But some things don't need explaining. They just need understanding and respect. Always respect.